for different workshops around navigating SFUSD, supporting your student, around students with special needs. So a wide gamut of topics that was identified through the design process. So it's a very robust model. The trainings for the partnership model started this fall, and the fall workshops will probably start being implemented, maybe a few by the end of the spring, but in more larger numbers in the fall. So
Commissioner Collins.
Okay, so I guess I wanted to start it off by saying that I guess we adopted this in 2014. Is that correct? But it was based on a previous resolution, which was adopted in 2009, which was also it's in support of comprehensive school climate, restorative justice, and alternatives to suspensions and expulsions. So in a sense, we've been working on this for the past 10 years. And I think what I'm hearing from folks is that they like the Safe and Supportive Schools resolution. A lot of people feel it's a very good document, but that the problem is actually an implementation. And so I guess what I'd like to ask is, I'm looking at the resolution right now, and I just want to ask if these things are happening or not, or maybe you don't, whether you know or don't know whether they're happening. So it says in here that restorative practices training and PBIS supports will be available to all teachers throughout the district. Is that currently happening?
Yes. So I can tell you that
every single teacher is trained in RP?
No. Okay. I can tell you that those opportunities have been made available every year to every teacher. We have several. There's not one day that's an RP training, just citywide. We've been offering, thousands of teachers have been trained over the years.
So is it up to teachers to decide to take the training?
Yes, it is. It is not mandatory training.
Okay.
Okay. And can I just say, the 2009, Commissioner Collins, the 2009 date that you're mentioning, and actually former Supervisor Kim was just here, that was her resolution. 2009 for restorative practices, actually when I came into my role in 2011, that was not being implemented. And so we struggle with that. We had we had several community meetings and Commissioner Kim Shree-Moffis was leading that group, and that resolution never really. So I don't want to say that from 2009 to 2014 we were implementing restorative practices. We were really struggling with restorative practices. 2014 brought in Safe and Supportive Schools to actually implement restorative practices because we were not doing that before.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that we tried to do it in 2009 and we didn't do it.
That's right.
And we're trying to do it now, but it may not be happening at all sites, is what I'm hearing.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so just to continue, it says that we are we're embracing restorative practices at all levels, including central office staff. Is that happening? And how is that? How are we seeing restorative practices happening in central office?
Well, that's a good question. I'm very restorative. No. I actually, to tell you the truth, I mean, what we really wanted, to be a district that thinks of repairing harm, recognizing relationships, strengthening relationships, and not being punitive is something that we do want at all of our schools. But it's a good practice for adult behavior as well. And I think the attention there was, so I can tell you in ways that we've had conflicts between adults in the district. Do we sit down and have a restorative conference? Yes, we can use that strategy because enough of us know how to do that.
I appreciate that. I don't want to take too much time. So my understanding is we don't know whether there's any structures in place to ensure that that's happening with central office.
Right. Many central office staff have been trained in restorative practices. Many, yes.
But we don't know specifically how many or if there's a structure in place. There's no specific structure in place.
I do have a log of all the numbers for RP, so I can actually give you a total number of everyone who's ever been trained in RP.
I would love to see that, and I'd also I'm hearing from also APAC families, they want to see that as well with trauma-informed practices, PBIS, any of the things that we've listed that we've trained on. It would be really helpful to see by site how many folks have been trained in the different things, and what percentage of the site. Because when I was at Francisco, we had a lot of problems a few years ago. Staff started telling me that they weren't trained and they were wanting to be trained, and now that I think more are trained, we're having a lot less issues. So I think I think parents would want to know that as well.
Can I correct and make sure that I understand you? I do have numbers for every year. I don't have them by site, and teachers
Okay.
move sites, so I can't say that. We've
Okay.
got quite a lot of adjustment there.
So you
I
don't.
can, but I can tell you numbers, and I
Okay.
should be able to tell you division.
Okay.
Elementary, middle,
I'd
and
also
high.
in the future be really interested in seeing numbers by site, because I think for me that would be implementation district wide. I'd be able to say by school how much of it is being implemented. And so I'm seeing on this, we have trauma-informed practices, behavior de-escalation, implicit bias, and stereotype. That's another one that I'm interested in seeing. And then I guess it says here that we're doing data-based decision-making. Implementation shall include regularly collecting and analyzing discipline data and sharing it with the school community to inform disciplinary practices and procedures. Do all schools have behavior plans, just first off?
The expectation is that they do. That the behavior support plan and the behavior, we've got President Solomon there. I'm missing on the title of it right now, but it's in the actual contract that there's a behavior plan in place at every school.
But is it actually happening at every school?
I don't collect them. The expectation is it is, and it is certainly stated to every principal.
Do you know if it's happening at every school?
I do not.
Okay.
No. Okay.
And then how are we gathering feedback from stakeholders on the efficacy of our plans in terms of talking to parents, talking to students, and talking to staff about how it's working? Because at some schools I hear it's great, and at other schools, and in my experience, before we had our principal, now it's great. Before we weren't doing it. Right. But we were saying that we were doing it. So I guess my question is, how do we know that the stakeholders who are experiencing it feel that it's effective?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I don't have an answer to that.
So I could say that the way we would tell that the stakeholders are feeling if it's effective or not is through we do culture and climate surveys, and we use that data to let us know what the stakeholders are feeling about their school, if it's effective, if the climate is effective. And one more thing, and then you asked the question about the behavior plans. The expectation is that we have assistant soups for each of the school cohorts, and the assistant soups, it's a responsibility of the assistant soups to make sure that that is happening at their sites. Behavior plan.
Okay, and how are we making sure that parents know about the behavior plans and are able to participate in creating those behavior plans?
So one of the things is with the TFI, one of the things when the culture climate team, part of the expectation of the culture climate team is to assess data in the school, what's happening, the social emotional data, the survey data that they said, how are students treating each other, how are they going to define the behavior expectations in that school, how are they going to communicate those to students and also to families. So it's also part of the expectation. How they do that, I don't know.
Well, I guess I'm not just talking about communicating it to, I'm talking about involving families in creating it.
And I think that would be the most desirable way to do it.
But we don't know if that's happening at all.
No, we don't.
Okay. And I guess I'd also just like to see data, because another point where we're getting feedback, is a place where we could get feedback. We've heard, families request transfers because they don't feel safe. I've heard a lot of Black families say sometimes they don't feel safe because of cultural safety, and they feel like their children are being targeted, and I'm sure that happens with other communities as well, like LGBTQ families and students with disabilities. So I'd like to know, are we tracking data around requests for transfer based on health and well-being, emergency transfers, and safety transfers?
We have all of that.
And can we see that by school and by kind of issue? The not a specific incident, but a type of category of issue.
Yes,
and then are we
bring that to a committee? That would be fine.
And then are we also doing that with bullying hotline and also parent voice complaints?
We have, so it depends on where the complaint is coming in. If it comes into Office of Family Voice, we do know the nature of that concern, okay? If there's some place to log it. As far as safety transfers go, if that's the reason for the safety transfer, then we do have that data. Actually, if we go into BASIS, our behavioral, academic, social, emotional intervention and support data, there is bullying in there. We could pull that category. In Synergy, if a student has been suspended for bullying, we can pull that particular behavior out as a reason for the suspension. So we do have distinct kind of disparate data points that might have information per site about bullying, but there's not a collective.
Okay, I guess the reason I'm asking is because at my school, we had problems before, now we don't. A lot of the kids that were, getting suspended were bringing in knives or bringing in, because they felt unsafe.
Right.
And they were getting triggered. Our staff was not trained to de-escalate. Staff was saying they needed help with restorative practices, so things weren't getting resolved. And then they would, boil up again. And also there's name calling and those kinds of things were happening, so kids were feeling unsafe. And it seems like our focus is all on the students who are getting suspended, but we're not actually looking at the conditions of learning and making sure that the conditions are safe and that we as adults are don't have implicit bias, that we're fully capable. And then so I'd like for us to be looking at what we're doing, because I think this is a great policy, but I think it's up to us to implement and how well we implement. I think where we are implementing the program, we're seeing great results. And so I'd like to see kind of how we're doing with implementation. And I guess finally, I'd also like to add that there's a huge focus on African American students. And I think it's just interesting that we talk a lot about behavior as the way that we define a safe school. But we should also be looking at cultural safety. And a lot of Black families and other groups are also say that their schools don't feel safe culturally. And I know Zaretta Hammond talks a lot about that. And so without that component being kind of specifically called out, how we talk about race in our schools and whether we're willing to do that, I think that is having a lot of impacts at Mirror and some of these other schools. So I'd like to see how we can track that across schools, which communities are doing that. Some are doing very well, and which schools are reticent to do that. Maybe that may be the missing piece. So thank you.